So one of the things that you may not know about me and my wife is that we have very, very different interests in books, television shows, and movies. It makes it often hard to decide what we're going to watch or what we're going to go see when we go to the movies. But every once in a while, my wife gets super excited about books or of a show, and she'll say, Tom, you have to watch this. And that is how I ended up watching the Divergent movies. I read the first book before the first movie came out, and I thought to myself, okay, it's not really my thing, but maybe there's some potential. But I didn't like it enough to read the second book before the second movie came out. And so I went into the second movie completely blind about what to expect. And I spent the whole movie cackling aloud at how stupid it was. Me, Cassie, a bunch of teenage girls, and some middle-aged women. I may have been the only man in the theater, and I was the loudest person mocking it. To be fair, Cassie also didn't think the movie worked, but she at least had the decorum not to mock it out loud for 2 hours. Later, when we were telling friends about it, they asked why I was so relentless in my mocking of this film, and Cassie said, it's because he cannot suspend reality for 2 hours. And I said, no, it's because I cannot suspend stupidity for 2 hours. Here was my real complaint. My real complaint was that well into the second movie, the writers were still trying to convince the audience that Tris, the main character, is the Messiah figure. Well into the second movie. It was like they assumed that the audience needed this perpetual reminder about who the Messiah was because we were too stupid to figure it out after the first 30 times they said it. And so they kept repeating it over and over and over and over again. And in the middle of the movie, I just thought to myself, I feel like they're insulting me. They're delivering the exact same big reveal every time. It's like, you're the Messiah. Like I'm too dumb to catch it. This is why, as I've gotten older, I have this general rule about books, movies, and television shows. And my rule is this, that I almost never start a series until that series is over and there are other people who I trust who tell me it is a good story all the way through. It ends well. It ends consistently. The writing is good. The big reveal pays off, and it's not going to waste your time, Tom. I've just simply been disappointed too many times. Was anybody else, do you all remember the TV show Lost? Right, thank you. Like, did you just feel the general emotional response in the room? Because my wife and I, we invested years in that television show. We waited for this creative payoff, for this long list of mysteries to be revealed. What is the island? Who are the others? What is the smoke monster? And after all of that buildup, the ending felt like it was written by a third grader. And not even one of the smart third graders. The dumbest third grader in the class. So I have a rule. I don't watch shows or read books until the series is complete and the big reveal is revealed and the payoff is worth it. So as we enter our gospel text today, the story has been unfolding for a long time, and the promises of a worthy payoff are massive. John has already told the crowds, I baptize you with water, but the one coming after me is going to baptize you with the Spirit and with fire. Massive promises. John imagines himself as a forerunner of God's wrath. He sees Jesus as the one who is going to enact that wrath, the Messiah, who is going to throw off the Romans and punish any Jews who have compromised with the Romans. So both the Old Testament, or Book 1, and John himself have made massive promises. They promise a redeemer who will throw off foreign oppressors, rescue the people, restore the land, rebuild David's throne, and bring global justice. I'd say we have pretty big promises. My wife sometimes likes to read these books. Most of the time she'll read these books that the world is literally at stake, right? And the figure needs to show up and save the world. And every once in a while she'll be like, I feel like I just need to read a silly book. Like, I'm tired of reading these books where, like, the world is at stake every time. John is promising that the world is at stake in what happens with the Messiah. And yet, despite everything that Book 1 has promised, Book 2 looks like it is absolutely going to mess up the payoff. Jesus is healing people, and that matters, but it's too small for what the promises were. They weren't promised a mere miracle worker or a magician. But there's no need to constantly remind people that Jesus is the Messiah because he's actually not acting like it. And John has not simply read a trilogy or invested himself in some movies. He's actually sitting in prison for this story that he believes in. From behind bars, he is watching the story develop, and he is saying to himself, I don't think the payoff is going to be quite what I anticipated. Notice John's question to Jesus that he sends to Jesus does not come from ignorance. Matthew tells us that John saw what Jesus is doing. John heard about what Jesus is doing. His question is coming out of a full investment in the story and seeing how the details are playing out. John is concerned not because Jesus is inactive, but because Jesus is active in all the wrong ways that don't contribute to a big payoff. John is worried that he should have waited to commit to the story until it was over to make sure that everything ends well. But here's where I noticed something in this passage that I had never noticed before until I sat down and I started reading it over and over. See, I've usually read this passage as this moment of doubt from John, and then Jesus sends him reassurance. That I have imagined Jesus' response to John saying, John, calm down. Don't worry, don't let your doubts get a hold of you, because look at all the amazing things I'm doing. I'm healing, John. I'm raising the dead. I'm preaching the good news. See, John, I am the Messiah, in case you needed a reminder. Don't be too dumb to miss it. But as I wrote the sermon, two details stood out to me that made me rethink this entire scene. One detail concerns what Jesus doesn't say, and one detail concerns what Jesus does say. And normally I don't like to read into silences in Scripture, but I think you're going to see that this one is really relevant. First, look at what Jesus doesn't say when he sends message back to John. We're going to quote Jesus. Tell him what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those with skin diseases receive healing, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor receive good news. All seems like great information. Every item on this list comes from Isaiah's Jubilee promises. They are markers of the Messianic kingdom. When God's Messianic kingdom shows up, these things are going to happen. But did anyone notice the one thing from Isaiah's promises that Jesus doesn't mention that would be absolutely relevant to John? Isaiah's Jubilee promises also say prisoners will be set free. And Jesus just completely drops that line when he's responding to a man who is in prison. Jesus leaves out the one promise on Isaiah's list that John would care about more than any other. The Messiah is supposed to free prisoners. And Jesus leaves it sitting there painfully absent, painfully unfinished, like the Game of Thrones book series. Second, look at how Jesus ends the message to John. What he does say is, "Blessed is anyone who takes no offense or doesn't stumble over me." Now, why would somebody get offended at Jesus working miracles? Like, if Jesus is just sending back this message is just like, look at all these really cool things I'm doing, then there's no reason to get offended, and therefore there's no reason to say this. Like, doesn't everybody love a good miracle worker? Unless Jesus knows that he's not addressing John's primary concerns and expectations. See, yeah. I mean, it's great when miracle workers show up, but messianic expectations were way beyond a miracle worker. Where's the global justice? Where's the toppling of empire? Why are the Romans still here? Why don't we have our land? Why is our family still being destroyed and crucified? Israel had seen miracle workers before. They don't need another miracle worker. John expected a better payoff. This would be like learning Luke Skywalker well into the 6th film is actually just a bald Wookiee who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Like, every single viewer 6 movies in would be like, wow, if it wasn't a waste of time before, it definitely is now. What a terrible payoff. And so Jesus' closing line is this gentle warning. Blessed are those who do not fall away when I disappoint your expectations. He's saying, I'm not going to set you free, John. I'm not raising an army. I'm not toppling Rome. I'm not restoring the land. I'm not reestablishing David's throne. I am not the Messiah you wanted. This story is not going to end the way you hoped. Prepare yourself so you don't stumble over it. I'm reminded in this moment of the scene in Revelation 5. Do you remember they're trying to open the seals to basically unlock God's will? And the writer of Revelation is super disappointed because one after another, like, nobody is worthy to open these seals on God's will on this book. And this elder comes up and taps John on the shoulders and he says, hey, don't worry, a lion is coming who can do this. And so John is super excited. Everybody, this Mufasa is coming, right? And then who walks the center stage is not a lion, but a bloody, slain lamb. The most disappointing image you could imagine. This is not supposed to be the unraveler and the unlocker of God's will. And when Jesus says this, be honest. Doesn't your heart kind of go out to John? Do you not also say something like, man, I know that feeling. The ache of disappointment with God. The frustration of God refusing to show up in the ways that I was promised or the ways that I thought God was going to show up. I'm going to tell you, I can't speak for other generations. I cannot speak for people who are older than me. I cannot speak for people who are younger than me. But I can at least say for people around my age that we see this all the time. with people we grew up going to church with. We grew up in church contexts that made enormous promises. We were told that if we lived the right way, if we followed the rules, if we stayed in church, then God was going to bless us. And life wouldn't be painless, but it would be evident that God's hand was on our life every single step of the way. And life just hasn't worked out that way. Now, I give you one example, a concrete example. This is one that makes everybody uncomfortable, but purity culture. Purity culture was basically our parents and our grandparents and our pastors and our especially terrible youth pastors telling us that if we kept ourselves sexually pure as teenagers, then God would reward us with great marriages and mind-blowing sex. And now my generation has reached middle age, and we discover that there is no causal relationship between teenage virginity and a good marriage, let alone anything mind-blowing. Am I lying? It was a promise that was designed to control us, not spiritually form us. If it were about spiritually forming us, they wouldn't have spent 85% of their time trying to tell us not to make out with each other. They're not interested in spiritually forming us. If you want to form people in a certain way, you don't give them rules. You change what their heart cares about, what they love, what they're attached to. And because the payoff never arrived, the implications of purity culture have always fallen hardest on women. Women were told to be the protector of male morality. Right? Boys, if you have lustful thoughts, just divert your eyes. As they say, just divert your eyes. Or, in the more spiritual form, they would tell us, when you see a girl's legs and you really like them, say, God, thank you for beauty. And then turn away. That was the implication for me. But women always received bigger promises and a bigger burden. The burden was, you have to be the protector of the male gaze. Make sure that your skirt isn't too short or your shirt isn't too tight. And all of the burden fell on women, and it still fell on women even when the promises didn't work out. Because then what you had was a whole generation of Christian women ended up marrying these creepy dudes. And when those women finally said, we're tired of these Christian creepy dudes, and they decided to divorce them, the church then blamed the women for getting the divorce. When the whole problem was set up by the fact that the church made false promises to control people. But we can't admit that, so we blame women. So a lot of these women now walk away from the church. They feel lied to, and justifiably so. And this is where I think Jesus' response to John has moral weight. Jesus tells John, and he tells us, that God has no interest in showing up the way you expect. And anyone that promises you that God is going to act in a certain particular way is trying to control you. God is in fact much more likely to intentionally disappoint your expectations. Let me say that again. God is much more likely to intentionally disappoint your expectations. Stay with me here. Because our expectations are often formed out of two temptations. The first is the desire to control other people. And the second is the desire to control God. And Jesus refuses to feed either one of these things. He's saying God will intentionally disappoint you so that you understand that God is not beholden to you. God doesn't have to act the way you want because God is not your servant. God is wild and free. And yes, God is good, but God does not belong to you. This is why we should be absolutely skeptical of anyone who tries to use God talk to control other people, let alone control God. Because the whole point of God talk should be to free us from the illusion we have control over anyone, let alone God. God is saying, I am not who you think I am. And that is good news. Because your disappointment is an invitation. I love the way Barbara Brown Taylor, a preacher from a previous generation, has said it. She says, every letdown becomes a lesson and a lure. Did God fail to come when I rubbed the lamp? Then perhaps God is not a genie. Who then is God? Did God fail to punish my enemies? Then perhaps God is not a cop. Who then is God? Did God fail to make everything run smoothly? Then perhaps God is not a mechanic. Who then is God? Over and over, my disappointments draw me deeper into the mystery of God's being and doing. Every time God declines to meet my expectations, another of my idols is exposed. Another curtain is drawn back so that I can see what I have propped up in God's place. No, that is not God. Who then is God? Friends, your disappointment with God is one of the most important ways God shapes you. The church has promised you that if you just use the right words to describe God, then life is going to be well. And what Jesus is saying is that no. God is actually found in the disappointments. Don't escape them, embrace them. Jesus says that John was the greatest person who ever lived, and yet John still sat in prison disappointed with God. Do you think that you're better than John? Or is it far more likely that God has woven disappointment into the life of faith so that we can learn again and again and again to release our idols and our false conceptions of God? Because I'm going to tell you, if anything disappoints, it is how this story ends. We don't get prisoners set free or holy militaries raised up. We get a Messiah executed by the very empire that he was supposed to overthrow. The cross breaks every rule about how big reveals should work because God loses. The Messiah is not what we wanted. And that's good news. Because that disappointment creates space for God to save us. Because only when our expectations fall apart can the crucified Lamb step onto the stage. And only then can we discover the God we never expected, but the only God that was ever capable of saving us. I'd say that's good news, even in our disappointment.